Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to sort through complex topics and, well, give you the insights you need without you having to read a whole stack of books and articles.
That's the goal, cutting through the noise.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into something huge, something that arguably shapes, well, almost everything around us globally: inequality.
It really is foundational to so many other issues we see playing out.
And our guide for this is none other than Joseph Stiglitz, a giant in economics, Nobel Prize winner.
And actually a dual Nobel connection, which is pretty rare. He got the Economics Prize in 2001, of course, but also shared the Peace Prize in 2007 for his work with the IPCC on climate change.
Right, that's an incredible background. And he wasn't just an academic, chief economist at the World Bank, chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under Clinton.
Yeah, he's seen how policy gets made and how it impacts the real world. Plus, his early work, The Economics of Information. It fundamentally changed how we understand markets, basically showing why markets aren't always perfect and where government might actually, help.
So he's got the theory, the policy experience, the whole package. Today we're focusing on maybe his most famous argument, especially from The Price of Inequality. He talks about this idea of an original sin in our modern world.
That's right. And the mission today is really to unpack his core thesis that a huge amount of the turmoil, the instability, even the tragedies we see across the globe can be traced back to this single word: inequality.
Not just any inequality, though, right? That's a key point he makes early on.
Absolutely crucial. We need to understand what kind of inequality he's talking about.
Okay, let's get into that. Stiglitz isn't arguing that, someone earning more because they invented something amazing or worked incredibly hard is inherently the problem. He draws a line.
Exactly. He readily acknowledges what you might call fair, merit-based inequality. Someone has a valuable skill, they put in the effort, they get educated, they innovate, and they earn more as a result. That could be a motivator, right? You can drive progress.
Sure, that makes sense.
That's not his target. His focus, and really this has been his life's work for, 40, 50 years, is on unfair inequality. Or maybe you think of it as systematic inequality.
Systematic, meaning?
Meaning it's not really about individual talent or luck or effort anymore. It's baked into the system.
Yeah.
It's about deliberate policies, laws, regulations,
Mm-hmm.
the rules of the economic game that are tilted.
Tilted to benefit certain groups.
Precisely. Crafted, consciously or unconsciously sometimes, to benefit the elites, those already at the top, often at the expense of everyone else, the vast majority.
So it's about how the game is rigged, not just who plays it well.
That's a good way to put it. It's about the design of the playing field itself.
Okay, so let's talk scale. How big is this problem, this unfair inequality, according to Stiglitz? Give us a sense, maybe starting with the U.S.
Well, the numbers in the U.S. are, frankly, staggering. You have the
Yeah.
richest 1% owning something like 30%, maybe even more now,
Yeah.
of the entire nation's wealth.
30% for just 1% of the people.
Yeah. And then you look at the other end. Around 60% of American households report struggling to cover basic needs, things like housing, healthcare, essentials.
And this is in the wealthiest country in history.
That's the irony, isn't it? You have millions of people working two, sometimes three jobs, just to scrape by. Meanwhile, at the very top, wealth accumulation is just accelerating.
And globally, does this pattern hold?
Oh, absolutely. Stiglitz points to regions like the Arab world, for example. There, the top 10% controls roughly 58% of the national income.
Over half for just a tenth of the population.
And it gets even more extreme. With wealth, they control about 80% of the total wealth. Meanwhile, the bottom half of the population, they share only about 8% of the income.
That's a chasm, not just a gap.
It is. And Stiglitz hammers this point home again and again. This isn't gravity. It's not some law of nature. It's the result of choices, policy choices, political choices made over decades.
Okay, so these choices have consequences. Let's dig into some of the big ideas or maybe myths that Stiglitz challenges, the ones that often prop up the status quo. The first one has to be the American dream, right? This idea that America is the land of opportunity.
Yeah, that's probably myth number one he takes aim at. The Horatio Alger story, right?
Yeah.
Rags to riches, pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Everyone knows it. But Stiglitz says, hold on, let's look at the actual data. What does it really show about mobility?
Well, this is where it gets quite sobering. The data reveals a couple of really uncomfortable truths for the U.S. First, among advanced industrial countries, the U.S. doesn't just have the most inequality.
Which we just talked about.
Right. It also turns out to have the least equality of opportunity.
Wait, the least. Less opportunity than Europe, Canada, Australia.
Less than any other advanced nation where we have comparable data. What that means is a young person's life, chances in the United States, their future income, their success, are more tightly bound to their parents' income and education level than anywhere else in the developed world.
So where you start is overwhelmingly where you end up.
Much more so than in other comparable countries. The dream of rising from the bottom to the top, based purely on merit and hard work, the data just doesn't support it as a widespread reality anymore.
Yeah.
It shatters that foundational myth.
That's a really powerful counter-narrative based on evidence. Okay, myth number 2 he goes after, trickle-down economics. The idea that if you just give more money to the rich, cut their taxes, deregulate, somehow that wealth will eventually flow down and benefit everyone.
Trickle down. Stiglitz has some choice words for this one. He sometimes jokes he wishes it were true.
Why?
Because we've certainly tried it. We've poured enormous sums of money towards the top of the income ladder for decades now. Tax cuts, deregulation. The experiment has been run.
And the results?
The evidence is overwhelmingly clear.
Yeah.
It doesn't work, at least not in the way it's promised. Look at median household income in the U.S. Adjusted for inflation, it's actually lower today than it was about 15 years ago.
Lower, despite economic growth overall.
Exactly. The pie got bigger, but the median household got a smaller share. And for a full-time male worker, the median income today is lower than it was way back in 1968.
1968, that's over half a century ago.
It's shocking, isn't it? And median wealth, it's fallen back to levels we saw in the early 1990s. So where did all the gains from decades of economic growth go?
To the top.
Almost entirely to the very, very top. Stiglitz puts it so vividly. You're getting a smaller slice of a growing pie, so much smaller that you're actually walking home with less. Trickle-down hasn't just failed to lift the middle, it's coincided with the middle falling behind.
Okay, so opportunity is less equal than we thought. Trickle down doesn't work. This next one really gets to the heart of how we justify wealth, doesn't it? The idea that people at the top simply contributed more value, the marginal productivity theory.
Right, this is a cornerstone of sort of classical economic thinking. You get paid based on your contribution to the economic output. Sounds fair, sounds logical.
But Stiglitz challenges this too.
He points to glaring, real-world examples where this clearly doesn't hold up. The most obvious one, again, is the 2008 financial crisis.
The bank executives.
Exactly. You had CEOs and top traders in finance who presided over decisions that nearly destroyed the global financial system. Their contribution, you could argue, was massively negative in that period.
Right. They caused immense damage.
Yet many of them walked away with enormous bonuses, multi-million-dollar payouts. Some banks, feeling a bit embarrassed maybe, relabeled them retention bonuses.
Which Stiglitz found absurd.
Completely absurd. He asks, why on earth would you want to retain the people who drove your institution and the whole economy to the brink of ruin? It makes no sense from a pure contribution standpoint.
It highlights a disconnect.
A massive disconnect. And he also makes another interesting point. Look at the Forbes list of the wealthiest people. Are they primarily the scientists who invented the transistor? The laser. The pioneers of the internet. The people who developed life-saving medicines.
Not usually, no. You see more financiers, maybe heirs, people who control existing assets.
Precisely. While those technological and scientific breakthroughs created immense value for society, the inventors themselves often aren't the ones capturing the lion's share of the financial rewards. It suggests that the highest incomes aren't always, or even usually, going to those making the biggest net contributions to society's well-being or productivity.
So if extreme wealth isn't always tied to contribution, how does it get so concentrated at the very top? This brings us to a really key concept in Stiglitz's work, rent-seeking. What exactly is that?
Rent-seeking is absolutely central to his analysis of modern inequality. It's a powerful idea. Think about it this way. There are basically two paths to getting wealthier.
Okay.
Path one, you create new wealth, you innovate, you build a better product, you provide a valuable service, you make the overall economic pie bigger. That's wealth creation.
The ideal scenario, presumably.
Right. Path two.
Yeah.
You figure out how to get a larger slice of the existing pie without actually making the pie any bigger. In fact, sometimes making it smaller. That's rent seeking.
So it's about extracting value rather than creating it.
Exactly. It's about manipulating the system, using influence, exploiting market failures or loopholes to divert wealth towards yourself, often from others. Stiglitz uses the analogy of oil-rich countries sometimes.
How so?
Well, if you have a fixed resource, like oil, a lot of the energy in society can go into fighting over who gets the rents, the profits from that oil, rather than into diversifying the economy or innovating. It can become a resource curse. paradoxically making the country poorer overall, despite the natural wealth.
And Stiglitz argues America has become more like that, a rent-seeking society.
Increasingly so, yes. He argues that a significant portion of the wealth at the very top today doesn't come from traditional entrepreneurial wealth creation, but from various forms of rent-seeking.
Okay, this is critical. Can you give us some concrete examples of where Stiglitz sees this rent-seeking happening in the U.S. economy? Where are people grabbing slices without baking?
Oh, there are many examples he points to. Let's start with the financial sector, which has grown enormously as a share of the economy. Stiglitz, echoing people like former Fed Chair Paul Volcker, questions how much genuine productive innovation has come out of finance recently. Volcker famously quipped that the only useful financial innovation he'd seen in decades was the ATM machine.
And even that was a British invention, I think you mentioned.
Exactly. Instead, Stiglitz points to activities like predatory lending, targeting vulnerable borrowers with unfair terms, abusive credit card practices with hidden fees and outrageous interest rates, market manipulation, like the LIBOR scandal where banks colluded to rig interest rates.
Things that clearly harm consumers or distort markets.
Yes, and insider trading. These activities don't grow the economic pie. They primarily transfer wealth, often from ordinary households and investors to financial insiders. They increase risk in the system and channel talent away from more productive sectors. Stronger financial regulations, Stiglitz argues, are crucial to curb this kind of rent extraction.
Okay, finance is a big one. Where else?
Monopolies and market power. Companies might make an initial innovation, which is great, but then they use patent thickets, lobbying, and anti-competitive practices to lock in that advantage, create barriers to entry, and essentially extract monopoly rents higher prices from consumers long after the initial innovation justifies it. This actually restrains overall production and makes the economy less efficient.
So using market dominance to charge more than is fair.
Pretty much. Then there's corporate governance. Stiglitz points to weaknesses in the laws that govern corporations. CEOs, he argues, have been able to exploit these weaknesses, like how their pay is set, often by boards they have influence over, to grab a much larger share of corporate revenues for themselves, often disconnected from the company's actual long-term performance.
The explosion in CEO pay relative to worker pay.
That's a classic symptom. It's not necessarily reflecting greater productivity, but greater power to extract rents from the company itself.
What about laws and regulations more broadly?
Huge area for rent seeking. Think about the bankruptcy law changes under President Bush. One provision gave derivatives, those complex financial instruments, first claim on a bankrupt company's assets ahead of workers or other creditors.
Which actually incentivized riskier derivatives.
Precisely. It encouraged the very instruments that fueled the 2008 crisis. And another stunning example from that same law, making student loan debt basically impossible to discharge in bankruptcy.
Even if you're truly destitute.
Yes. Unlike almost any other kind of debt. Stiglitz calls this a noose of debt around young people's necks, a profoundly unfair and frankly inhumane provision that locks in inequality across generations. It serves the interests of lenders, not society or the students.
That's a stark example of rules benefiting one group.
It really is. Then there's the tax system. We talked about trickle-down failing, but the tax code itself is riddled with loopholes and preferences that disproportionately benefit the wealthy and corporations.
Like lower tax rates on capital gains versus wages?
Exactly. Stiglitz often highlights how speculators who make money from market fluctuations can end up paying taxes at a fraction of the rate paid by people who work for a living every day. Plus, the ability of corporations and the super rich to use tax havens and sophisticated accounting to avoid taxes that ordinary workers can't escape.
The 2017 Trump tax cuts are another example he might point to.
Absolutely. While pitched as benefiting everyone, analysis show the vast majority of the benefits flowed directly to shareholders and corporate executives through stock buybacks and dividends, not primarily through wage increases or new investments. That's rent-seeking via the tax code.
What about deregulation? That's often presented as pro-growth.
Stiglitz argues that deregulation often amounts to removing rules that protect the public interest, rules protecting workers, communities, the environment. This allows companies to externalize their costs onto society, polluting more, paying workers less, taking excessive risks, thereby boosting their private profits, but at a huge public cost.
Like the banks before 2008.
The perfect example. Deregulation allowed them to take massive, cuts to public investment, especially in things like education, healthcare, and infrastructure. When we underinvest in these areas, it disproportionately harms those who rely on public services. Rich families can afford private schools and top healthcare, creating a separate track. This traps poverty across generations and limits opportunity for everyone else. It locks in advantage.
It reinforces the inequality we started with.
Precisely. And one last, very current example, pharmaceutical pricing. Stiglitz points out that the outrageous prices for many life-saving drugs in the U.S. aren't primarily driven by the cost of R&D, but by the company's ability to lobby politicians to protect their pricing power and prevent negotiation, like Medicare negotiating drug prices until very recently.
The hepatitis C drug example is famous.
Yes, Sovaldi. Sold for $84,000 for a course of treatment in the U.S. when it first came out, while generic versions were available for around $300 in India. That price difference isn't R&D cost. It's rent extracted due to politically protected market power.
So across finance, monopolies, corporate governance, laws, taxes, deregulation, Stiglitz is arguing that a huge chunk of the wealth at the top comes from manipulating these systems, not necessarily from creating equivalent value.
That's the core argument. It's not about demonizing wealth. It's about understanding how that wealth is generated and whether the rules of the game are fair and promoting overall prosperity, or if they're tilted towards extraction.
Okay, so we've established the scale of inequality, busted some myths, and explored the mechanisms of rent-seeking. This leads us to the title of his book, The Price of Inequality. What is this price? What are the costs, economic, political, social meth that society pays for these deep divisions?
Right, because there's this persistent narrative, isn't there, that if we try to tackle inequality, if we tax the rich more or regulate corporations, we'll somehow kill the golden goose and harm the economy.
Yeah, that it'll stifle innovation or reduce investment.
Stiglitz argues quite forcefully that the opposite is true. It's the extreme inequality itself that imposes a massive cost on our economy, our democracy, and our society.
Okay, let's break that down. What's the economic price?
He outlines several major economic costs. First, think about resource allocation. When the tax system, as we discussed, taxes income from speculation at lower rates than income from work.
Like capital gains versus wages.
Exactly. What does that incentivize? It encourages talent and capital to flow into speculation and financial engineering, rather than into creating real goods and services, long-term investment, or innovation. That makes the overall economy less productive and more fragile.
So it misdirects effort. What else?
The lack of equality of opportunity we talked about earlier, that's not just unfair, it's incredibly wasteful economically. Millions of children born into poverty who lack access to good nutrition, healthcare, and education simply cannot live up to their full potential.
We're losing talent.
We're wasting immense human resources. Think of the innovations never made, the businesses never started, the potential squandered because someone didn't get a fair shot due to the circumstances of their birth. That's a direct drag on economic growth.
That makes intuitive sense.
Also, a deeply divided society struggles to make necessary public investments. Things like basic research, infrastructure, education, technology, the foundations of long-term prosperity. Why? Because the 1% often don't feel they need public services. They can buy their own.
They use private schools, gated communities, maybe private security.
Right. And they often fear that a strong, effective government might actually ask them to pay their fair share in taxes to fund those public goods. So there's often an incentive for the very wealthy to advocate for or at least tolerate a weaker government, even if that undermines the country's overall economic potential.
Interesting. A desire for weak government born from self-interest.
Maybe most fundamentally, Stiglitz argues inequality actually contributed significantly to the instability that led to the 2008 crisis.
How so?
Think about demand. People at the bottom and middle tend to spend most of what they earn. People at the very top save a much larger portion of their income. So when you massively redistribute income from the bottom and middle to the top, as we did for decades.
Overall consumer demand weakens.
Exactly. Total demand in the economy tends to fall, or at least grow much slower. The response from policymakers, particularly the Federal Reserve, was partly to keep interest rates extremely low and encourage lax lending standards to try and prop up demand.
Which fueled the housing bubble.
Which fueled the unsustainable housing bubble. That bubble eventually burst, leading directly to the crisis. So in this view, the extreme inequality created the underlying economic weakness that made the crisis almost inevitable.
Wow. So inequality isn't just a consequence of economic problems, it can be a cause.
A fundamental cause of instability and slower growth. Yes, that's a core part of the economic price.
Okay, that's the economic price. What about the political price of inequality?
This is perhaps even more corrosive, Stiglitz argues. Extreme economic inequality inevitably translates into extreme political inequality. Our democracy starts to operate less on the principle of one person, one vote, and more like $1, one vote.
Money talks in politics.
Loudly. Wealthy individuals, corporations, and organized lobby groups can pour vast sums into campaigns, lobbying efforts, funding think tanks, and shaping media narratives. This gives them disproportionate influence over who gets elected and what laws and regulations get passed or blocked.
You mentioned Citizens United earlier.
That Supreme Court decision is a prime example, opening the floodgates to corporate and union spending in elections. But it's broader than that. It's about access, about shaping the agenda, ensuring that the rules continue to favor those with wealth and power. It erodes public trust and makes it harder to address the very inequality that fuels the problem. A vicious cycle.
A cycle where political power reinforces economic inequality and vice versa.
Precisely.
And finally, the social and health price. This sounds particularly grim.
It is. And Stiglitz emphasizes this isn't just abstract. Inequality manifests physically in our health and well-being. We see it starkly in health statistics.
Like life expectancy.
Yes. Gains in longevity over recent decades have gone disproportionately to those at the top of the income and education ladder. But the most shocking, truly disturbing finding he highlights is for those at the very bottom.
What did the data show there?
For women with low levels of education, particularly white women without a high school degree, life expectancy in the U.S. has actually gone down significantly over the last 15, 20 years.
Gone down in a modern, wealthy country.
Yes, down by more than 4 years in some studies. These are numbers, Stiglitz points out, that are comparable to, or even worse than, the decline seen in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's a sign of deep societal distress, lack of hope, poor health access, economic despair, maybe deaths of despair from opioid, suicide, alcohol.
That's horrifying. It's a profound indicator of just how serious the social consequences are.
It really is. It tells you that this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about real human suffering and wasted lives, directly linked to the deep divisions in our society. That's a heavy price indeed.
Okay, this paints a pretty daunting picture. The economic waste, the political capture, the social breakdown. It sounds quite bleak. But Stiglitz doesn't leave it there, does he? He offers hope. If inequality is a choice, as he says,
then we can make different choices. That's the crucial takeaway.
So this extreme level of inequality we see, especially in the U.S., it's not inevitable. It's not just the natural outcome of market forces or globalization.
Absolutely not inevitable. And the proof is right there when you look around the world. Other advanced industrial countries face the same global market forces, the same technological changes.
But they don't all have the same level of inequality.
Not even close.
Mm-hmm.
Many countries in Europe, Canada, Australia, Japan, they have market economies. They're part of the global system. But they have significantly less inequality and often more equality of opportunity than the U.S. Why? Because they've made different policy choices.
Different rules for the game.
Different rules, stronger social safety nets, more support for workers and unions, more progressive tax systems, better regulation of finance, more investment in public education and healthcare. Their outcomes demonstrate that policy matters enormously.
He also mentions Brazil, right?
Yeah.
As an example of change being possible.
Yes. Brazil is an interesting case because historically it had incredibly high levels of inequality, even worse than the U.S. in some respects. But starting about 20 years ago, they made a conscious political decision to change course.
What did they do?
They implemented policies specifically designed to reduce poverty and inequality. Things like the Bolsa Família program, a conditional cash transfer program, alongside significant investments in education and social programs.
And it worked.
It led to a marked reduction in inequality and poverty over that period. It shows that even countries starting from a very unequal position can choose a different path and make real progress. So the answer is yes. We absolutely can change our laws, our regulations, our policies to create a fairer society.
Yeah.
It's not predetermined.
So, if change is possible, what does Stiglitz propose? What's on his agenda for reform to tackle both the economic drivers and the political blockages?
He lays out a fairly comprehensive prescription, tackling it on multiple fronts. Economically, it involves strengthening the rules of the game to promote fair competition and curb rent seeking.
Like what specifically?
Better competition laws to prevent excessive market concentration and monopoly power. Stronger financial regulations to prevent the kind of abuses and excessive risk-taking we saw before 2008. Reforms to corporate governance to better align executive pay with long-term performance and stakeholder interests, not just short-term stock prices.
So, re-regulating markets to make them fairer and more stable.
Exactly. And balancing that with stronger social legislation. Things like supporting workers' rights to organize and bargain collectively through unions, investing more in education from early childhood through college to genuinely improve equality of opportunity, strengthening the social safety net, a more progressive tax system where corporations and the wealthy pay their fair share.
It sounds like a reversal of many trends from the past few decades.
In many ways, yes. But Stiglitz argues these aren't radical ideas. They're often about restoring balance and ensuring markets serve society, not the other way around. However, he's also very clear that these economic reforms alone aren't enough if the political system is rigged.
Ah, right. The political price we talked about, the $1 one vote problem.
Precisely. So, more fundamentally, he stresses the need for political reforms. We have to address things like campaign finance, finding ways to reduce the overwhelming influence of big money in elections, tackling the revolving door phenomenon, where people shuttle between government jobs regulating an industry and high-paying jobs within that same industry.
Creating conflicts of interest.
Massive ones. We need greater transparency in lobbying and government decision-making. Basically, fixing the systemic issues that allow economic power to translate so directly into political power and block meaningful reform.
That political reform piece sounds like the toughest nut to crack, doesn't it? Given the entrenched interests that benefit from the current system.
It's undoubtedly a huge challenge. The beneficiaries of the current system have enormous resources to resist change.
So, what gives Stiglitz hope? Why does he think society can pull back from this brink despite those obstacles?
He draws hope partly from history. He reminds us that the U.S. has been here before. We've had periods of extreme inequality in the past.
Like the Gilded Age.
Exactly. The late 19th century, the era of the robber barons, and again in the Roaring '20s, just before the Great Depression. Inequality reached levels comparable to or even exceeding what we see today.
But we didn't stay there.
We didn't. In both instances, eventually, American democracy responded. The Gilded Age was followed by the Progressive Era, with trust-busting, regulations, and political reforms. The excesses of the 1920s led to the New Deal in the 1930s, with Social Security, financial regulation, and stronger worker protections.
So history shows it's possible to correct course.
It shows that when enough people recognize the system is unfair and unsustainable, change can happen. Stiglitz's hope seems to lie in the power of awareness and democratic action. His bet is that if the vast majority, the 99% as the Occupy movement put it, come to truly understand how the system is working or not working for them.
If they realize they've been, as he says, sold a bill of goods.
Yes. If they realize that policies benefiting the 1% are often not in their own best interest, that trickle down is a myth, that opportunity isn't equal, then perhaps they will demand change. They will vote differently. They will support politicians and policies that aim to create a more equitable, more opportunity-rich society.
So it comes down to perception, understanding, and ultimately collective political will.
At the end of the day, yes. Changing the narrative, helping people see the reality behind the myths, is the first step towards mobilizing the political will needed for real reform. That seems to be where he places his hope.
Well, this deep dive into Joseph Stiglitz's work, particularly The Price of Inequality, certainly gives us a lot to think about. It really drives home that these gaps in wealth and opportunity aren't just some abstract economic statistic.
No, they hit us where we live. Our health, the functioning of our democracy, the sense of fairness and community in our society, it's all intertwined with this issue.
And it pushes us to question those easy narratives, the American dream, trickle down and look much harder at how the rules of the game, the systems themselves, are structured and who they truly benefit.
For me, the most powerful takeaway is that core message. Inequality at this extreme level isn't inevitable. It's not like the weather. It's the result of choices we've made.
Which means we can make different choices going forward.
Exactly. It puts the power and the responsibility back on us. Now that we have a clearer understanding of the price we're paying for inequality, the really important question becomes, what different choices are we prepared to make?
A question for all of us to consider. We hope this exploration has shed some light on these vital issues and maybe given you some new frameworks for thinking about how we build a more just and prosperous society for everyone. Thank you for joining us today.